My name is John Doolah. My heritage is from Eastern Torres Strait, from the islands of Mer, which we call Murray Island, and Erub, which is Darnley Island, the English name. My ancestors are Toik and Diri. Toik is a Waraway man from Mer. He married Dere from Erub, Darnley Island. And so I use my Meriam identity, my Mer identity, because the society of Mer is a paternalistic society. So from generation to generation, we follow the inheritance of the father, the line of the father. So Mer has three groups, three island groups. Mer is the larger group, larger island. There's two small islands, Dawar and Wair, small islands. So my Mer tribe is I belong to the Samsep tribe, one of 8 tribes of Mer. The Samsep tribe is the same tribe as Edimabo, Uncle Koiki. So in Meriam culture, we are one people. Uncle Koiki and myself, we're considered one people because there's 2 subgroups. There's 2 divisions we call PEC, subgroups of the Samsep tribe. Uncle Koiki belonged to Meriam Pedram, and that's one group, and I belong to Meriam-Samsep. My tribal division is Meriam-Samsep. The village, which the name is also the name of my village. Uncle Koiki's village is Las, L-A-S. My village is Waraway. Waraway is the village is one of our multiple Meriam identities. We have many. We have wind identities also, and I belong to the Sager people. But anyway, my mother is from Mer also, Mer. Her tribe is the Comet tribe. She belonged to the division of, or the PEC of Zeub Comet, my mom. My mother's heritage, on my mother's side, her heritage of my grandmother or grandfather is Kagru of Zeub, the village of Zeub. Kagru married a woman from Dawar, a Dawareb woman, one of the 2 small islands. And Kagru's wife is the eldest daughter of the Mamus, a leader of Dawar, that island. Yeah, so at the moment I'm a Ngarrngga Post Doctoral Fellow. I came to Melbourne after I completed my PhD in 2021. I completed my PhD. I submitted my PhD in July 2001, and while it was being examined, I applied for a job at the University of Melbourne, and I was accepted as lecturer in Indigenous education at the University of Melbourne, the faculty of Melbourne Graduate School of Education, MGSE. It's now Faculty of Education now, changed. So yeah, so I was lecturing in Indigenous education subject, breadth subject, and then the Masters, First Nations in Education, the Masters subject here at Melbourne University. But at the Newcastle University, I started there after I graduated. I started at the University of Newcastle in 2006, and I began teaching after I graduated. I was doing my master's. I began lecturing in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander studies since 2006. And then I did my master's and my PhD and graduated in PhD 2021. Then moved over to Melbourne. But I took students in the courses subject that I did at the University of Newcastle. I would take students out to the local Aboriginal sites. We visited the National Museum in Sydney, and and just incorporated the community experience with the students. That was one of my main focus, was to not only teach what is in the classroom, but take students out. So we had students from overseas, international students, from Europe, from America, from Asia, and we taught in the class, and domestic students as well as Indigenous students. So at one part of when I began teaching, lecturing, we had courses where we taught just a group called of they were Indigenous studies group courses which are taught for Indigenous students, and then there was also courses for non-Indigenous students, because the idea to have courses for Indigenous students was to when they became managers of Aboriginal organizations. That was the idea. But then we expanded out to include a class of both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal students. With a new bachelor, it was then changed from the Bachelor of Aboriginal Studies to a Bachelor of Professional Practice. Included everyone in that. At the University of Newcastle, and here at Melbourne, I was lecturing on courses, breadth courses, for example, Introduction to Indigenous Education is one of the subjects. And other subject, there was master's subject as well. Courses about Australian Indigenous education, so for the master side. So I taught first as well in the First Nation in education courses with semester 1, which is still now running here at the university. But at the moment, I am doing work integrated learning courses for master's students, and we call it WIL, and I'd go out to Mildura each year for the WIL program, and at the moment I have a group out there for the month of August, secondary group and primary group, and they do their experience in community. Yeah. And I'm the leader of WIL Indigenous Leader, or WIL Leader Indigenous, of that group. So this is what I'm doing at the moment, and moving into the research part with Ngarrngga now. This is what I'm doing now at the moment. Okay, so my PhD, the title of my PhD, so I did a master's, and the master's first was titled um, Decolonizing Migration and Urbanization of Torres Strait Islanders, Island People from the Torres Straits to mainland Australia between 1960s and 1970s. Um, and that was the time that when we moved, I moved with my parents to the mainland from the Torres Strait. Uh, so my PhD is titled, so I kept following that, the migration um, idea. And my PhD was titled Stories Behind Torres Strait Migration Myth, The Journey of Sap stroke Bete. So Sap is Meriam language for driftwood, my totem, and Bete is Western Island language, Kalalagau, yeah, for driftwood, Bete. So I use both in because I was, I'm talking about the Torres Strait in my master. Yeah. As I said, the Sap is a Meriam Eastern Torres Strait Island language for driftwood, and Bete is Western Island language. So I use Sap, the driftwood. It's one of my totem, which in the Meriam language it's called Lubabat as a totem. So I use it as a metaphor and a central theme, the concept and the idea of traveling from the Torres Strait to Keodaudai, which is what we call the continent of Australia. Um, uh, because it is the land of Aboriginal people, that's the idea of using the Sap metaphor. We island people are visitors, and I provided a cultural meaning of that through the metaphor of drifting, the drifting concept of the Sap. So this is not really our land, we're just drifting um, on the land of our Aboriginal and our brothers and sisters. So the word migration for me, I looked at the migration and I couldn't find a way of explaining that from a cultural perspective in regards to the Torres Strait Islander movement, because it would, from a more Western side, it would mean that we left our home now, that we are no longer connected there, that we're going to build a new life in Australia. And I couldn't see that. If I was to fully go into the idea of the migration, it would mean this disconnection to and our identity as Torres Strait Islanders. So I explain it more from a cultural perspective now. This is why I use the Lubabat Sap, the driftwood, as my metaphor. So as a child, I grew up in the Torres Strait. I left there when I was 12 years old. I left the Torres Strait. Um, I lived with my mom. She she lived at Mer because dad worked on the lugger boats, pearling luggers. So my dad lived with my uncle in Erub. This was in the early 1960s. So then we moved from Erub. We moved from Mer to Erub. So I would have been about 3 years old when we moved from Mer to Erub. And we lived in Erup for a while. I went to kindergarten there, and I remember we um, I remember we had milk, sunshine, powdered milk. We drank powdered milk. This is what I remember my early uh, kindergarten days in Erup. And then we moved from Erup to TI, Thursday Island, or Waiben. Waiben is the Kaurarek name, Aboriginal name for Thursday Island, because that area is the area of the Kaurarek people, Aboriginal people, their territorial area. So we left TI in 1960. I want to explain this because I want to explain the background of how I came to understand GED as an adult now. When you ask me the question, it's that background that's there. So 12 years old, we left YBEN TI, 1969. So from then, I already had an understanding of an experience of what Torres Strait Islander, the meaning of family and the extended family and the community, and as it continues today. So when I call my uncle, I know they're my dad. All my uncles are dad, my father's brothers, and their cousins are my dad's, and my aunties, my mother's. We call them Ama, mother. And even today, when I call somebody my Ama, if they would reply, they would call me son. This is the culture, the family culture. I understood that because of the background. Everybody, when I was little, everybody would introduce themselves and say, I'm your father. Your dad is my brother. I'm your dad. And they would say things like that. If you come to my home, whatever is in the fridge, it's yours, you eat it. This is the kind of thing. So I understood that. And so later on now, for me, when the language of Ged now, I understood that not only from Torres Strait on a cultural perspective, but also from what it would mean for outsiders, Westerners. So I'm able to then differentiate between those two meanings. And then I would say that Ged is not a house, it's home. That's what I would say Ged is. And this is what I understand about it because of that. So it's not only the land, the sea, and the sky. It's also all my moms, all my dads, all my grandfathers, which we call Ata. All my grandfathers, Western Island, they say Aka, grandmother, and Ate, grandfather, all of them. And I experience that every day. Like when I meet a grandfather or grandmother, when I meet them, I visited Mer in 1996. I visited Mer. I met one of my grandfather for the first time, and it felt like it was one-on-one. It was just me and him talking. He took me for a walk, and it was like I knew him all my life. This is what Ged means to me. That connection, which is unbroken. I know it's never going to be broken. And this is the quote from Sharp, Noni Sharp. She explained. Explanation is Ged means the root of a tree. It also means origin or spring. Ged, which means home or place or homeland, is the undetachable milieu of Meriam identity. For each individual must have a homeland. For an unborn Meriam, Ged is the mother's womb. At birth, the individual moves from this Ged to that Ged. The land belonging to his father, Gizged, is the center of the world. So there is a really deep spiritual meaning which goes into sacred knowledge that I can't kind of explain that part. But you can see how inheritance in that quote, how inheritance comes from conception, not from a birth certificate or from conception. And this was the idea, I guess, behind Uncle Koichi. His move to fight the native title is because of that unbroken connection that was said from birth. So I think this is one of the what inspired me to write the master's and the PhD because I needed to research meaningfully from an indigenous cultural perspective to show that living on mainland Australia, Keododai, is just a brief visit. This is the metaphor, just a brief visit. So there is no discontinuation to the Torres Strait. And we argue disconnection of any kind. We argue that it is not the loss of our identity. If we do argue disconnection, then we'd have to talk about the loss of our identity on the mainland. And so what it means for people living on the mainland, it's not so much part of our culture, but it's part of the barrier of the act, the government acts and all that, and ticking the box. Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander. Yeah, this is what it's about, and you feel like it makes us feel when we tick the box, and it makes us feel like that, or the act, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Act now, that it only applies for people in the Torres Strait region, not island people living in the mainland Australia. So in a way, we're kind of living on no man's land. That's the kind of thing. Yeah, and that's my metaphor of drifting. Yeah, and so we can't lose our identity. We can't do that. So this is our status now for the people living on the mainland. But we never lost connection with the homeland, Torres Strait. Most people, or people living in Queensland, they would have the finance and luxury of going back, like for Christmas. And any chance that they have, they would travel back. Living in Melbourne is kind of too far away to do that. But if I could, I would go every Christmas. Thanks. Our old people, I first read a quote from my grandmother from the Torres Strait. When our people started to move to the mainland, my grandmother had a quote. He would speak in Creole. He would say, when they move to Aboriginal country, you from Torres Strait, why move to other people's land when you're from the Torres Strait? So that oral story, but we're always reminded of our identity in our practice and what we do. From the movement, and so just for the reason that we're down here because of job and education. But our deep, distinct identity, it has a deep, profound cultural meaning and goes beyond like understanding outside understanding. So the names that were given to us that we became used to, like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, we became used to now. The community have accepted that, are more objects of that what we say Western imperialism, that separation and colonization. So so when I say we are Ged, we are country, and we have and occupied the unique geographical section of Earth, which we call in language Gesep, and not only the Gesep, Earth, but also Kotor, above the heaven, the stars. Um, so it's about us and as people in our identity. So our identity then, I would say, is a precise geographic location is based on Earth, where we come from. First Nations people have many, because we have already have our names before. So besides being called Torres Strait Islander, I am Meriam-Samsep. That's how I see myself. And, Aboriginal people, Woiwurrung, Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, that's their identity as well. So we didn't have that background of your Aboriginal and your Torres Strait Islander, but you come from Ged. And I think it's our later on how I understood the meaning of decolonization, like from I understood that more from tertiary education, more from that side, because that's when you put things in their perspective. I guess based on education and what it means. And so, I mean, I always say that decolonization is not something that we talk about in the community because, like, our excuse me, our our focus is on what we eat on the table, food and stuff like that. So decolonization is not something. It doesn't stop us from practicing our culture, but in explaining that as a student and an educator, uh, decolonization for me is a process of First Nations people navigating themselves in Western society, maintaining their identity and culture, the choices of how they choose to live, and whatever the challenges are. Um, and I find, and summarizing that, I find that usually in the decolonization process, we have to explain ourselves twice. The first time we talk to outsiders about our culture, and the second time we explain the meaning, what we mean about the culture, what we mean with words. Yeah. So there's uh, two explanations, first time and second time. This is how I understand decolonization. So from the decolonization perspective, you're looking from your cultural lens at everything. But it's a process. That's what, yeah. Yeah. I would call, well, it would actually like one and then going into the other, like the process of decolonization, working through that, and indigenization too as well. Um, but it's more about talking about the stories and telling them from the inside rather than what outsiders are telling us about ourselves. And I really like the idea where Indigenous scholars are talking about retelling, retelling, restoring, revisioning, speaking back, you know, to that, telling our stories about everything. So this would probably be my idea of what decolonization is involved. Yeah, I mean, this is, I guess this is one of the things like I never really looked into living on the mainland, but I know that the people in the Torres Strait, how um, that situation is going to affect them in a bigger way because the island, the people from Western Torres Strait near Papua New Guinea, Saibai, they've already moved to Bamaga, a settlement in Bamaga, because of inundation of tides. Um, they tried to build walls there, but the tide still comes over and floods the houses and the graveyards. Uh, the bodies are exposed. Yeah. So uh, I guess what it would probably mean, and like I don't want to, I don't want to predict, is that if the culture is this strong, because when people migrated to the mainland, Portuguese migrated to the mainland, not all of us came. Families have stayed there. They still stay there. They never came to the mainland. So for them, and for all of us, it's going to be like they're going to stay there, and it wouldn't surprise. I'm looking way, way into the future, where they probably live on boats. Where the location of the island is, they probably it's underwater. Mm. Because yeah, it's one of the things about Indigenous Australia is that when you're connected to the land, you can't go anywhere else. It's there. You stay. So yeah, so for me, it's going to be all negative, and it's going to come to a stage where um, islanders are really, we really need to get together and really focus on that issue and have conversations of what it will be like if we lose our home. Because it's kind of, we won't be Torres Strait Islanders anymore. I mean, future generations, if the land is underwater, we won't know what it would be like and to pass on to future generations and to have them pass on to the next generation what it's like to be a Torres Strait Islander. When I finished my PhD, the concluding message was that uh, to be continued, so people can build on that. Um, it was more, it was more of a foundation uh, of putting everything together and laying down a foundation for future research. This was what I thought. Um, my intention, anyway, for that, because like how I understand and talk about Torres Strait Islander culture, future generations are going to be of of people of island heritage, Torres Strait Islander heritage, who have who are both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So, yeah. So the idea of the Torres Strait and the mainland, they would have to talk about that too as well. And they can, my research would be a foundation for that. The Ngarrngga project, I'm just going to quote what's from the Ngarrngga website. So they have, from the Ngarrngga website, our vision is for all Australian students to have the opportunity to connect with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge system, histories and culture, to support educators in this work. Ngarrngga provide free, high-quality curriculum resources and professional development modules spanning from all subject areas from 3 to 10. So my part in that, which I think is it's the vision of the director of Ngarrngga, Professor Melita Hogan. So her idea was to incorporate Torres Strait Islander knowledge in that Ngarrngga project, national project. And this is what we're working on now. So although I'm doing articles and conferences and symposiums, it's all laying that foundation for that Ngarrngga project as well. And I'm looking at really big funding to write about it, Torres Strait Islander knowledge, which I think is the last connection for Australia. So, like at the moment, we have Tasmania, the Palawa people of Tasmania, their connection to mainland Australia. The Torres Strait has been separated. We're going to make that connection now with Torres Strait Islander knowledge in the classroom and showing what pre-Indigenous Australia is and always has been. And I'm really excited for it. AARE conferences, I presented a paper. The last one was here, and it was called Before Colonization There Was Mabo, Educating Australia and the World. That was the title of my paper. So it's doing that thing as well, showing connections and what Mabo or connection to land means for Indigenous people. So it's not only about us knowing ourselves, but what the world should know about us and our connection. Yeah, I think I would I have the quote from there about language and our language and land from my my cousin Bua Benjamin Mabo. I mean, we used to play together in Townsville. I knew him from then, but he became a Meriam linguist. So he passed away, my cousin. So his quote that language and culture is inseparable. And the quote is Keriba gesep agekar dikwarda keriba mir ableglam keriba mir pakotonar nole atakemurkak. So the word atakemurkak is inseparable. So it means the land actually gave birth to our language. Our language and culture are inseparable. Yeah. So when in the meaning of Ged is also what the language is saying about our land, about where we come from. So, we can write article, we can research about the people, but you can't, the meaning of the language will always connect us to our heritage and to the land, to where we come from. Yeah. It won't separate us. We can always come back and say, no, the language meaning is this. That's language. And the other thing about language is that I've seen like Torres Strait Islander Christians, Christian old people, they would sing a song in English, but when they sing in the language, they cry. They would cry, emotion, because they know what it means in the language. I would see that, you could see that. Or even when they speak in language, you see emotion in there because they understand the meaning.